Hi guys. Hello everyone. Hi. Let's see who's here. Let's see. Okay. Hi Sbashe. Right. Let's see. Oh yes. Hi Bushe. Hi Sbashe. Hi guys. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Right. So in today's lesson, let us not waste time. In today's lesson, the lesson is based on processing devices. Okay, so yesterday we were talking, yesterday's lesson was based on storage. Okay, so this one is based on processing devices. With the lesson that is based on storage, you can go to YouTube and watch the lesson. So now we are looking at processing devices. I hope you've seen the test. We have a CAT test. Please go to the website, check out the test. There's a theory test and a practical test. Please go and check, then complete those tests, write the test, and then send the test. You can send it to me, or yes, you can send it to me. On the question papers, I have my email address. So when you are done, you can send your answer sheet. Okay. So in today's lesson, processing. Processing is the second stage of the information cycle. So you have learned about the information cycle, remember? So processing is the second stage. The first stage is the input. Input is the first stage. Processing is the second stage of information processing cycle. So this lesson is based on the second stage, which is processing. Right, so processing mainly uses the system components of the computer, such as the motherboard, the CPU, and RAM for its task. Right, so in this lesson, you will learn more about the role of each component of a computer system. So the role of the motherboard, the role of the CPU, the role of the RAM and the ROM. Okay, how they work and what they do. And how to interpret computer advertisements. So after you have learned about the components of, the roles of each component, the role of a motherboard, CPU, RAM, and ROM, then you'll be able to interpret a computer advertisement. So you'll be able to know how to select or choose a computer when you want to buy a computer. Right, so the motherboard. Okay, the motherboard. The motherboard is one of the most essential parts of the computer. So one of the most essential parts of the computer. Can you see a picture of the motherboard? The motherboard holds many of the components that allow a computer to function. So it holds many components that allow the computer to function, such as the CPU, the RAM, and the connectors for input and output devices. So by the motherboard, okay, as you can see on the motherboard holds many of these components. The CPU, so the motherboard holds the CPU, the RAM, and the connectors for input and output devices. By connectors for input and output devices, I mean where you connect your keyboard, your mouse, your printers, etc. So the motherboard holds many of the components that allow a computer to function. So it holds the CPU, the RAM, and the connectors that allows you to input, to insert or to connect your input and output devices. The connectors that allows you to connect your keyboard, your mouse, your printer. So the motherboard helps you with that. Okay. We said it holds many of the components, which are the CPU, the RAM, the connectors. So the motherboard is like a mother, mother that holds her children or pieces together. Okay. Now the role of the motherboard. One is to provide a place for other devices or interfaces to be installed, such as more memory or another graphic card. So this one provides a place for more devices or interfaces to be installed. Okay, the motherboard. Right, so then we have the second role of the motherboard. It distributes power to the various components. So this one holds the power and it distributes power motherboard. Okay, sorry. So this one, the motherboard acts as a communication hub, as the components send and receive information through the motherboard. Okay, so everything that you do, it passes by the motherboard. The motherboard is like a communication hub, as the components send and receive information. So when you are giving the computer instructions, these instructions or whatever, they pass by the motherboard. And then the motherboard is like a communication hub. It sends and receives information. So other components receives information and send information through the motherboard. Okay, so before the CPU comes the motherboard. Now, what do I mean by CPU? CPU is the central processing unit. The central processing unit. The CPU, which is also called the processor. This CPU carries out is like the brain. Yes, it is basically the brain of the computer, and it does arithmetical, logical, and input or output operations of a computer program. So CPU is important. CPU is like the brain of the computer. Okay, I remember I once had a test with my grade 10 learners. So the test was a match column A with column B. So we had descriptions on the left-hand side and terms on the right-hand side. So one of the terms was central processing unit. So CPU was one of the terms. So there was one description that said the most, or yes, did it say the most? Yes, the most important component amongst these terms. So CPU was there, but then one of the learners said the start button is the most important, because without the start button, you can't use the computer. One of the learners said, what? Yes, I can't remember, but I can remember that one of my learners said the start button is the most in a computer. So he chose the start button. There was an option for start button, CPU, and many more. So he said the start button is the most important in a computer. And guess what? He was wrong, because the answer was CPU. CPU is like the brain. As you as a human, look at yourself. Which part of your body is the most important? I'm not saying the brain is the most important, but consider this. Yes, you have your heart and everything, but then you have your brain. Your brain. So CPU is like the brain. I'm not saying the most important, but I'm saying it's like the brain of the computer. Does the arithmetical, logical, and input or output operations of a computer. So CPU is important when you are working with a computer. Can a computer work without a CPU? If the CPU is not functional, can it work? Can my learner see or use the start button? Can they? So can you see the importance of the CPU? Okay, so the CPU carries out the instructions of a computer program. So if I type, that's an input. So if I type, that's an input. Processing between the motherboard and the rest, which one is it going to process these instructions? I'm inserting or entering instructions. I want the computer to type this letter for me. I'm typing these words. Which one is going to process this information? The CPU. CPU carries out the instructions of a computer program. So if I'm using a program, the CPU is going to carry out these instructions. So the CPU is basically the brain of the computer. It does the arithmetical, logical, and input or output operations of a computer. Okay, now how do we measure the speed of a CPU? The speed of the CPU tells you how much data it can process in a specific time and is measured in gigahertz. So in tests, like the theory test, the question, it always comes up, the speed of a CPU. The speed is measured in what? In gigahertz, so you must know. Right, so anything, if you want to say something, guys, please say it. Okay, now the CPU, all instructions, whether they have been generated by the system or the user, go through the CPU. Yes, like I have said, all instructions, whether they have been generated by the system or the user, they go through the CPU. So CPU is like the brain. They go through the CPU. Okay, this could be anything from the operating system executing a task to the user typing the letter in a document. Okay, so this could be anything from the operating system executing a task to the user typing the letter. Yes, I've made the example of typing a letter in a document. So this could be anything from the operating system executing a task to the user typing letters in a document. EU does. Now we are moving to ROM and RAM. So RAM, let's start with RAM, random access memory. So while RAM and ROM are both types of memory, they perform different functions. Right, so RAM and ROM are types of memory. These perform different functions. RAM is also called random access memory and is a specific type of data storage. So RAM is a data storage. It allows data to be accessed in random order, which means specific information can be found quickly. So RAM is where the CPU goes to fetch the instructions and data that it needs to work on. Right, so now if you are doing something, you are typing a letter in a document, obviously you are giving your computer instructions. So these instructions, they are stored in the RAM. So RAM is a type of a storage or a type of memory. Okay, so RAM, we said, is a type of a storage. It allows data to be accessed in random order, which means specific information can be found quickly. So on the RAM is where the CPU goes to fetch the instructions and data that it needs to work. So when you are inserting or you're typing or whatever, your data will save that, the RAM will save that data. Then the CPU comes to the RAM, collects that data, and then perform the task that you want it to perform. So you want to type, everything has to go through the CPU, but first it is stored in RAM, in the random access memory. So the CPU goes to the RAM to fetch the instructions and data that it needs to work on. So RAM gets its content by loading them from storage. RAM is temporary storage for data for programs that are running. So every program that is running, each program's data is stored in the RAM. RAM stores this data for the CPU to come collect and perform the task. So RAM is a temporary storage for the data for programs that are running, allowing the programs to work faster. Okay, so when you have a program that is running, the data for this program is stored in the RAM. Then the RAM allows the program to work faster. So RAM is helping the program. RAM keeps data. Then while keeping this data, the CPU fetches this instruction and data so that it can work on it. As a user, when you are using a program, say when you are using Word, you want to type, you are typing, these instructions are saved on the RAM. While you are typing, these instructions are on the RAM. Then the CPU fetches these instructions to do the task. So it helps you by processing what you are inputting. Right, so then after processing what you are inputting, then it puts everything on the memory, which is an output you can see now. So the CPU has done processing. Now you can see the result, which is text on the screen. Right, so RAM stores data of programs that you are working with. So you are typing these instructions, the data goes through the RAM, the CPU comes to the RAM to fetch this instruction and then does everything that it needs to do. All right, then we have the ROM, the read-only memory. This one stores the basic instructions for what needs to happen when the computer is switched on. It contains the basic code to get the computer started. Right, so normally stored on the BIOS chip in the motherboard. We are not gonna look at that now. The information stored in the ROM is often difficult to change, and the data is not lost when the computer is powered down. So data that is saved on the RAM, once the computer is shut down, then the data is lost. It becomes lost. But with ROM, this one, it is difficult to change the data, and the data is not lost when the computer is powered down. So even if you shut the computer down, everything that is in the ROM is not changed or is not lost. It becomes stored. It is not lost. It doesn't get lost. Right, so let's see these examples again. Let's go back. Remember, we have a motherboard. A motherboard is one of the most essential parts of a computer. One of the most essential parts of a computer, just like a mother holding her kids or pieces together. It holds many of the components that allow a computer to function. So a motherboard is like a mother to the CPU, the RAM, the connectors, like those connectors where you can connect your keyboard, your printers. So a motherboard is like the mother for all of these components. So the connectors for input and output devices are found here on the motherboard. They are found on the motherboard. Yes, they are found on the motherboard. Okay, the CPU is also here on the motherboard. Okay, so we said the role of the motherboard is to provide a place for other devices or interfaces to be installed. Okay, so motherboard provides a place. Can you see a place for other devices or interfaces to be installed? Here is a place for other devices to be installed. You can connect your keyboard to the computer. You can connect your printers, your speakers, etc. So the motherboard holds a place for those things. It provides a place for the other devices or interfaces to be installed. So it holds or it provides a place for you to connect those devices. So there's a place for connecting other devices in the motherboard. Okay, so every time when you are thinking of the motherboard, think of your mother or your grandmother, or just think of a mother. Yes. And then you will understand what a motherboard is. Okay. Motherboard has the same characteristics, or I don't know, but the same characteristics as a mother. Provides a place for other devices or interfaces to be installed, just like your mother, if yes, your mother or a mother provides or it holds everything together. There's places where you can connect other devices or interfaces. So everything is found here on the motherboard. Okay, the motherboard distributes power to the various components. So it distributes power to the various components. Okay, it acts as a communication hub as the components send and receive information through motherboard. So everything has to pass by the motherboard. Power, the motherboard gets power and then distributes this power to various components. Right, so we have a central processing unit. The central processing unit, can you see the picture of a central processing unit? Central processing unit. Okay. All right, so a central processing unit, which is also called the processor. This one carries out instructions of a computer program. This is like the brain. Okay, this is like the brain of the computer, and it does the arithmetical, logical, and input or output operations of a computer. So this one is like the brain of a computer. Right, so yes, remember we said the speed of a CPU, you can see the speed by gigahertz. So gigahertz is used to measure the speed of a CPU. Okay. Then we had the RAM and ROM. RAM and ROM. RAM and ROM. Okay, so the RAM is also called random access memory and is a specific type of data storage. So RAM is used for storage. RAM stores data, but then data that is stored on RAM gets lost once the computer is turned off. But data that is stored on the ROM, it's difficult for that data to be changed or to get lost. So the data stored on ROM is often difficult to change and is not lost when the computer is powered down. But with RAM, RAM, random access memory, it gets lost once the computer is turned off. With ROM, it doesn't. RAM is where the CPU goes to fetch the instructions and data that it needs to work on. So the role of the RAM is to hold this data and these instructions. So when you are inserting instructions or you are working on something, there are instructions. RAM will hold those instructions and data of programs that you are using. So data and instructions. RAM will hold this data and instructions for CPU to come and fetch those instructions. But then once the computer is turned off, this data gets lost. RAM is also temporary storage for data for programs that are running, allowing the programs to work faster. So RAM helps with making the programs to run faster. Okay. Right, so we said RAM holds the instructions and data of programs that you are using, the instructions that you are giving the computer. It holds them for a very short period. Once the computer is turned off, then the data and instructions on the RAM gets lost. But with ROM, this one stores the basic instructions for what needs to happen when the computer is switched on. It contains the basic code to get the computer started. Right, so the information stored in the RAM is often difficult to change, yes, and it doesn't get lost when the computer is turned off. Now, let us look at an advertisement. So I have an example here of a computer advertisement. It's a picture. One of the shops were advertising a computer. So now I want to give you skills on how to interpret a computer advert. How can you interpret? How can you choose a computer for yourself? Maybe in future you want to buy a computer. How can you choose what to look for? Right, so here is the example. Interpret computer advertisements. So when you buy a new computer or storage device, there are several key factors to consider. Okay, by using what you know about this computer, about this components, you will be able to interpret the information and advertisement for computers. Right, so now you know the roles of these components, the motherboard, the CPU, RAM, ROM. You know the roles of these components. By knowing the role of these components, then that means as from today, you'll be able to choose a computer, or you should be able to choose a computer. But when you are choosing a computer, you want to buy a computer, first thing that you need to put in mind is you yourself, your needs when it comes to computers. What do you do? What do you need your computer for? Do you need the computer for emails, typing, just for checking emails and typing documents? Or do you want to edit games, videos, etc.? So you should look at that. Let's see this one. So the monitor, here is the size of the monitor. Then the CPU, the Intel Core i5 laptop. This is an Intel Core i5 laptop. So i5, sorry. So this is a CPU, this Intel Core i5. It has the speed of 3.10, up to 3.10. So computers, the CPU of the speed of a CPU, it differs. Some computers have a speed of a CPU that is below 3.10. Some has a space of up to 3.10. Some are less. This one has a speed of a CPU that is 3.10 gigahertz. Okay, so it allows Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. Okay, Windows 10 Home, includes backpack mounts. Okay, 2-year collect and repair warranty. All right, so now you can see here is RAM, 8 GB RAM, the CPU. Let's see. Okay. How fast is the CPU in a computer? So now, here you have your needs. You know your needs. You know what you are looking for in a computer. Okay, for myself, I'm not editing pictures. I'm not editing videos. I just need a computer for typing and checking emails. Typing documents, checking emails. Yes. So then if I need a computer like that, I need to check the speed of the processor. Remember that the faster the CPU works, the faster your computer will be able to process data. So a 3 gigahertz processor is twice as fast as a 1.5 gigahertz one. So with editing documents, with typing and editing documents, checking out emails, a speed of 1.5 gigahertz should be enough. Yes, but then a speed of 3 gigahertz, then that's good. 3, it means now the computer will work more faster. will work faster. With 1.5K, yeah, 1.5 is good for people like me who edit, who just type, edit, check emails. Yes, I'm not a gamer. I do not edit videos, so a 1.5 gigahertz one would be good for me. But then if you are someone who edits videos, pictures, who play games, then you need a computer that has a speed of up to 3.1 gigahertz, just like this one. Right, so then how big is the memory? Yes, okay, so you need to check the speed. How fast is the CPU in the computer? 1. 2, how big is the memory? How big is the memory? The more RAM you have, the more programs and applications can run at once. So if you have more speed, the more RAM you have, that means you can use more programs at once. Programs and applications at once. So I can open many programs and applications at once because I have I have RAM, I have more RAM, sorry. So like this one, it has 8 GB RAM. So you can open many programs and applications at once. So many programs and applications can run at once. Yes. Okay, most computers come with 4 GB of RAM. So it comes with 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is good for users who do not need to do much more than check emails or create some documents. So 4 GB would be good for someone like me. Users who do not need to do much more than check emails or create some documents. Okay, so users who need their computer to do slightly more can look at getting 8 GB. So for an example, such as games, videos, video editing software. So if you are like me, 8 GB, yes, it's cool. But then even if I had 4 GB, it's fine. But then for someone who works on the programs, who uses software that needs more RAM, then they need to consider a computer that has 8 GB of RAM. 8 GB, can you see this one? 8 GB. Okay, 4 gig of RAM would be good for a user like me, those who check emails, create documents, and that's it. 4 gig is fine. But 8 gig is good for those who use computers for games, video editing, etc. 8, okay. Okay, so they can look at 8 gigabytes depending on how many of those games and video software they are using. So 8 gigabytes going up. There's also 16 gigabytes. So computers with 16 gigabytes RAM are available. They are available. They should look at that also. So from 8 going up, that one is good for those who use softwares like games and video photo editing software. Okay, but for us who check emails, create documents, 4 gigabytes is good, it's cool. Okay, so one more thing that you need to check. How much storage capacity does it have? The storage capacity, you must check the storage capacity. Okay, the storage capacity must also be checked. Remember with RAM, everything stored on RAM. This is primary storage. RAM is primary storage. So we do not consider that as permanent storage. So you must check how much secondary storage capacity does the computer have? How much space does the computer have? Can I save documents? Can I save videos on this thing, on this computer? Which operating system does the computer use? Yes, you must also check that. Which operating system does this computer use? The latest operating system will be more compatible with new programs. Okay, with new programs, the latest operating system will be more compatible with new programs and will be more secure and able to support the drivers for your hardware, right? So when you are buying a computer, you should also consider the operating system. Which operating system does the computer use? Choose the latest, right? Choose the latest, as it will have, or it will be more compatible with new programs, and it will be more secure and able to support the drivers for your hardware. So this computer uses Windows 10, Windows 10 Home. Okay. This one uses Windows 10 Home. I saw, yes, Windows 10 Home. So this is a operating system. It's an operating system. Right, so yes, guys, that's it for today. That's it for today's lesson. We have looked at the motherboard, RAM, ROM, and the CPU. All right, so today's lesson, we said today's lesson was based on the processing devices. Which ones? The motherboard, the CPU, RAM, ROM, etc. Right, so guys, I hope you have enjoyed the lesson. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you guys in the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.